When I first saw the text on his phone, I felt something in my chest snap, a quiet, cold fracture I couldn't shake. It wasn't the first time I'd felt it, that unease creeping over me in quiet moments. But this was undeniable. And the worst part? My sister-in-law had been standing right beside him the whole time, not as a witness to my marriage, but as an accomplice. I remember the morning like it was etched into my memory. The smell of burnt toast lingering in the kitchen, the sunlight bouncing off the faded blue tiles, the ticking of the old clock that hung crookedly on the wall. He was humming a tune I didn't recognize, tying his shoes in the doorway, while my son played with his wooden blocks on the rug. Everything seemed normal, too normal in hindsight. There was a rhythm to our mornings, a soft familiarity that I had trusted for years. But the dissonance had been there, like an off-key note in a melody I thought I knew by heart. I sipped my lukewarm coffee, feeling the bitter tang scrape my tongue, and smiled at him as he bent down to kiss our son's forehead. "Have a good day, love," I said. His smile was polite, a little too practiced. I didn't notice then, but that same smile had become a mask over the years, one I would later come to see for what it really was. Life before that morning had felt steady. We had our routines. I would take my son to school, come back to tidy up, and wait for him to return from work. Dinner was usually around 7, something simple, chicken and vegetables, or pasta if he was home late. The walls of our modest home were decorated with family pictures, my son's first steps, our wedding photo, a framed shot of him holding my father's old fishing rod. They were reminders of a life we had built together, of the promises we had made, quietly and without fanfare. It all looked perfect on the surface, safe, comfortable, but safety, as I would learn, is often an illusion. I had always been a little uneasy around my sister-in-law, though I never admitted it. She had a charm that drew people in, a warmth that seemed genuine at first glance. But there was something calculating in the way she watched, the way she laughed a little too loudly at his jokes, or lingered a fraction too long near him when no one was looking. I brushed it off for years, blaming my own insecurities, my overactive imagination. After all, family meant loyalty, didn't it? We were supposed to trust one another, or so I thought. The first hint that something was off came subtly. My husband started coming home later than usual, citing extra work or traffic. His phone always seemed to buzz in his pocket, and suddenly he became possessive about it, leaving it face down on the table whenever he entered a room. Little things, like the faint scent of someone else's perfume lingering on his jacket, or the way he would flinch when I mentioned plans for the weekend. At first, I tried to ignore it. I told myself I was imagining things, perhaps stress at work, perhaps I was overthinking. But deep down, the pit in my stomach grew heavier each day. It was during one of those ordinary evenings that the first real clue emerged. We were at my sister-in-law's house for dinner. She had invited us over, insisting it was family time, though I began to suspect there was more to it than that. She had set the table with care, the candles flickering in the dim light, the aroma of roasted chicken and garlic filling the air. I noticed how she positioned herself near him, subtly steering the conversation, keeping him distracted. And then, in a quiet moment, when I stepped away to refill my water glass, I saw it. A glance, a quick exchange of words and hushed tones, too fast for me to catch the meaning, but enough to ignite a spark of suspicion in my mind. The seed was planted, but I wasn't ready to see it for what it truly was. I told myself I was being paranoid. Families whisper, after all. Siblings tease one another. But something in her eyes, the way she avoided my gaze, made my heart tighten. She knew. She had known for years, and yet she pretended to be just another member of the family. And my husband? My husband was the star player in a game I hadn't even realized we were part of. I remember walking home that night, the streets quiet under a canopy of amber streetlights. My son had fallen asleep in the back seat, his soft breathing a reminder of the innocence I was desperate to protect. My hand hovered over the steering wheel, trembling slightly as the realization settled over me like a fog. For years I had trusted him. For years I had believed in the family we had built. And for years my sister-in-law had been orchestrating a deception right under my nose. It wasn't dramatic, not yet. There were no raised voices, no slamming doors, just the quiet, insidious knowledge that everything I thought I knew had been tainted. I tried to push it aside, telling myself I needed proof before I acted. But that night, lying in bed, listening to the faint hum of the city outside, I couldn't sleep. Every shadow seemed to hold a secret. Every sound, the creak of the floorboards, the distant bark of a dog, the soft rustle of leaves in the wind, felt like a warning. And I knew, deep in my bones, that my life was about to change forever. The next morning, I tried to go about our routine as if nothing had happened. I packed my son's lunch, kissed his forehead, and waved as he boarded the bus. But my mind was elsewhere, replaying every interaction, every word, every glance from the night before. The way my sister-in-law had leaned closer to him, the secretive way they communicated, the slight hesitation when I asked a question, my husband's sudden defensiveness whenever I asked about his day. All the pieces were starting to fall into place, though I wasn't ready to confront them yet. I needed evidence, I needed certainty, and most of all, I needed to prepare myself for the heartbreak that was coming. I remember standing by the window that morning, watching the world awaken, the smell of rain lingering in the air, the leaves glistening under the soft drizzle. And in that moment, I made a promise to myself. I would uncover the truth, no matter how painful, no matter how much it would shake the foundation of my life. I would see it for what it was, because the truth, no matter how harsh, was the only way forward. The first real clue didn't come with a dramatic confrontation. It came quietly, almost innocuously, like the soft drip of water that eventually wears through stone. It was a Thursday evening, the sky a dull, sleet gray, the kind of weather that makes the world feel heavy and expectant. I was in the kitchen, washing dishes, the warm water stinging slightly against my hands, when I noticed it. His phone, left carelessly on the counter, screen lit with a message I wasn't supposed to see. At first, I hesitated, telling myself not to look. Trust was supposed to be the cornerstone of a marriage, wasn't it? But curiosity has a way of making a liar out of virtue. I picked it up, just for a second, my thumb brushing over the screen, and that second was enough. There was a string of messages between him and someone named Lena. They were casual at first, nothing overtly incriminating, jokes, emojis, small talk. But then the tone shifted. Plans were being made, meetings in secret, laughter that wasn't shared with me. My chest tightened, the dishes slipping slightly in my wet hands. I didn't say anything. I couldn't. I had learned long ago that confronting without certainty only makes you appear weak, desperate. I set the phone back down, trying to act normal, while my mind spun through the possibilities. Who was Lena? Why the secrecy? And how long had this been going on? It wasn't just the messages. Little things started to accumulate, subtle signs I had been ignoring for months. He would leave for work meetings that never quite matched the hours he was gone, receipts for dinners I had never attended, cafes I didn't know existed, a faint perfume clinging to his coat, floral and unfamiliar. At first, I questioned myself. Had I imagined it? Was I becoming paranoid? but deep down I knew I wasn't. Something was wrong. And then there was my sister-in-law. She was always around, but not in the way of family gatherings or casual visits. She appeared at unexpected times, always with a cheerful excuse, always lingering a little longer than seemed necessary. I started noticing patterns. She was always conveniently busy when I needed to speak with him alone, or she would call him at odd hours, her voice light and teasing, her tone familiar in a way that made my skin crawl. One evening, I found myself alone in the living room, the soft hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of the floorboards the only sounds around me. I noticed her jacket on the hall chair, left there from an earlier visit. Something made me reach for her purse, an impulse I almost immediately regretted. And yet, when I opened it, tucked at the bottom, I found it. A small notebook filled with addresses, phone numbers, and cryptic notes, names I didn't recognize, meeting times and locations. And at the top of a page, in a handwriting I knew well, was his name, followed by check marks, times, and what looked like confirmations of appointments. My stomach lurched. My mind raced. This wasn't just casual oversight or friendly involvement. She was keeping track. She was helping him. The realization settled like a stone in my gut. For years, she hadn't just stood by. She had been actively involved, enabling him, covering for him, making sure his secrets stayed buried. And I had been blind, trusting the wrong people. I tried to confront it logically, step by step. Could it be innocent? Was there some explanation I hadn't considered? But every scenario I created in my mind felt forced, implausible. The evidence was too precise, too deliberate. She was complicit, and the betrayal cut deeper than I could have imagined, because it wasn't just a husband deceiving a wife. It was family, the people I trusted most. I began to watch them more carefully, my anxiety twisting into something I hadn't recognized before: vigilance. I noticed the quick glances they exchanged, the subtle changes in posture when I entered a room, the way her laughter seemed rehearsed, too loud in the empty spaces of our shared moments, the way he would answer my questions with careful neutrality, steering the conversation away from certain topics with practiced ease. Every interaction became a puzzle I was determined to solve. I started keeping a journal, noting down times, dates, odd behaviors. It felt almost absurd at first, me scribbling observations about my own husband and sister-in-law like a detective. But the more I wrote, the clearer it became. Patterns emerged, undeniable now. Every meeting he claimed to have, every work trip, every late-night call was meticulously coordinated with her. She wasn't just a bystander. She was the one holding the threads. It was during one of these investigative nights that I stumbled upon a small but telling detail. He'd left his laptop open on the dining table, a document minimized on the screen. I didn't want to look, but the name flashed briefly. Lena, weekend plan. Something in me compelled me to hover the mouse, and the document popped up. It was a list of their planned excursions, dates, and even notes about what to say if I asked questions. I read it and felt the room spin. The betrayal wasn't just emotional anymore. It was organized, rehearsed, years of deception hidden in plain sight. And my sister-in-law, the one person I had once confided in, the one I had trusted to be family, had been orchestrating it all, helping him hide a secret life that I had unknowingly been living alongside. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat on the edge of the bed staring at the dim glow of the streetlights through the curtains, my son's soft breathing a reminder of what I had to protect. Every memory of her smiles, her laughter, every casual visit she had made now felt like a lie. And as the night stretched on, I made a silent vow. I would uncover the full truth. I would confront them, but not without preparation, not without understanding the depth of the betrayal. Because this wasn't just about infidelity or lies. It was about family loyalty, about trust, about the sanctity of everything I thought we had. And as dawn broke, washing the room in pale light, I felt a strange mix of fear and determination. I knew the path ahead would be painful. I knew it would test the limits of my patience and my courage. But I also knew one thing. I could no longer pretend everything was normal. I could no longer let them hide behind smiles and excuses. The truth was waiting, and I was ready to face it. It wasn't until the Saturday morning, 2 weeks later, that I finally saw the full picture. I had spent countless hours in quiet observation, making notes, piecing together fragments of conversations, texts, receipts, and subtle behaviors. I had convinced myself I was preparing for a confrontation, but deep down, part of me feared the truth, not because of him, not really, but because of what it would mean for my family, for my son, for the life I had trusted was real. That morning, I woke to the smell of fresh coffee drifting from the kitchen. He was already there, reading the newspaper, his posture relaxed, his face the mask of normalcy. My heart ached with a mixture of anger and sorrow. I wanted to scream, to throw the paper across the room, to demand answers, but I didn't. I needed proof, tangible, undeniable proof that could not be denied or explained away. I noticed a slip of paper sticking out from under his laptop, a small envelope, white and unassuming, but my intuition told me it held the key. I slid it out gently, careful not to disturb anything else. Inside were receipts, flight tickets, and notes, everything I had suspected and more. Weekend trips he had never mentioned, dinners and hotel restaurants, small gifts labeled with a name I now knew well, Lena. And there, at the bottom of the stack, a handwritten note. Make sure she doesn't find out. Call me if anything goes wrong. My hands shook as I read the words, the reality settling in like a weight pressing down on my chest. She had been actively coordinating this, my sister-in-law, helping him cover his tracks, making sure I remained oblivious, keeping the lie alive while my heart beat faithfully, unaware of the duplicity around me. I remember sitting down on the edge of the bed, the receipts clutched in my hand, feeling the tears sting my eyes. How had I not seen it sooner? The late-night calls, the secretive glances, the strange excuses, it had all been orchestrated, all carefully hidden in plain sight, and I had been blind, trusting the people who were supposed to be closest to me. I confronted him that afternoon. My voice was calm, measured, but underneath it, every word carried the weight of my disbelief and betrayal. "Why, James?" I asked, my hands trembling slightly. "Why would you let this go on? And why involve her?" He froze, the color draining from his face. For a moment, he looked like a man caught in a spotlight, unable to hide behind the masks he had worn for years. Then, slowly, the excuses began. Work stress, emotional distance, confusion. But when I mentioned her name, my sister-in-law, he faltered. That hesitation, that tiny crack in his carefully constructed facade confirmed everything I had suspected. She had been more than just a friend to him in this. She had been a partner in deception. The confrontation wasn't explosive. There were no screams, no doors slammed, no threats, just silence, thick and suffocating, broken only by my soft, controlled breathing. I remember sitting across from him at the kitchen table, the envelope between us, like a dam waiting to burst. "How long?" I whispered. He avoided my eyes, his hands fidgeting nervously with the edge of a napkin. "Years," he finally admitted, voice low, almost inaudible, and in that single word my world collapsed. Years of lies, years of hidden tricks, secret dinners, whispered messages, all facilitated by the person I had once trusted implicitly, my sister-in-law. The betrayal wasn't just emotional, it was methodical, calculated, and cruel. I needed to hear it from her, to look into her eyes and understand why she had done this. So I called her, pretending I didn't know. "Hey," I said casually when she answered, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. "Can we talk?" She agreed immediately, her tone warm and unsuspecting. I remember sitting across from her at the local cafe, the aroma of roasted coffee beans mixing with the faint scent of her perfume, the same perfume I had noticed on his coat weeks ago. She smiled at me, a practiced, reassuring smile, the kind that could make anyone drop their guard. But I didn't. I couldn't. "I know," I said softly, letting the words hang between us. Her smile faltered just a fraction, the first crack in her armor. "What do you know?" she asked, though her voice carried the faintest tremor. "I know about James, I know about Lena, and I know you've been helping him." Her reaction was almost immediate, surprise, quickly masked by defensiveness. I don't know what you mean," she said, her eyes flicking away. But I had seen enough, the subtle twitch in her hand, the way her fingers drummed nervously against the table, the slight tightening of her jaw. She had been caught. "I've seen the messages, the receipts, the trips, the plans," I continued, my voice calm but unwavering. "You've been covering for him, coordinating, making sure I stayed in the dark." For a moment, she said nothing. Then, almost casually, she leaned back in her chair, letting out a quiet sigh. "It's complicated," she said, but her tone betrayed her. There was no remorse, only the faintest hint of pride in the cleverness of her deception. And in that moment, I realized the depth of the betrayal. This wasn't about love or even misguided loyalty. It was about control, secrecy, and manipulation. I left that cafe with a heavy heart, the autumn wind whipping against my coat as I walked home. Every step felt surreal, like I was moving through a life that no longer belonged to me. I thought about my son, about the home I had trusted, about the years of smiles and quiet evenings, now shadowed by deceit. And yet, underneath the pain, a small ember of resolve began to burn. If they thought they could orchestrate this, that they could hide behind lies and manipulation, they were wrong. I would confront them, yes, but not in rage. I would confront them with clarity, with evidence, with the quiet strength of someone who had been wronged but not broken. And so began the painstaking process of documenting every detail, every instance of collusion, every moment they had tried to deceive me. It was exhausting, emotionally draining, and yet strangely empowering. For the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of control. The truth was out there, and soon it would no longer be hidden behind their carefully constructed masks. I spent the next few days in a fog, moving through our home as if I were both present and absent at the same time. My husband was polite, careful not to make a wrong move, and my sister-in-law kept up the facade of normalcy whenever she came over. But I knew better. Every smile, every laugh, every casual remark was a mask, a carefully rehearsed performance to maintain their secret. And every time I saw them together, I felt the weight of the betrayal pressing down on me, heavy and suffocating. I knew I couldn't act recklessly. This wasn't just about anger. It was about reclaiming my life, my dignity, and protecting my son from the fallout. I started quietly documenting everything, the texts, the receipts, the small inconsistencies I had noticed over the months. I took photos of receipts he had carelessly left lying around, copied emails, noted dates and times. Every detail mattered. Every detail would be a piece of the puzzle that proved the extent of their deceit. And then came the first real opportunity to act. He had promised to take our son to a soccer match that Saturday morning. A simple enough errand, but it presented a small window of solitude, a chance to access his office, the one space he always left locked when I wasn't around. My hands shook as I turned the key in the lock, the familiar click sounding louder than it should have. Inside, files were stacked neatly, but I knew what I was looking for. Anything that could confirm the depth of his secret life. It didn't take long. A folder labeled Lena caught my eye immediately. Inside were bank statements, hotel confirmations, and gift receipts, all for things he had told me were business expenses or work-related trips. There were also personal notes, places to meet, dates to call, excuses to use if I asked questions. My chest tightened as I sifted through them, a mix of anger and sorrow washing over me. They had thought they could hide it, keep it buried under polite smiles and careful planning. But here it was, all laid bare in black and white. I left the office quietly, folder in hand, my mind racing. Confronting them directly felt both necessary and terrifying. I thought about the possibilities, the apologies, the denials, the lies they would spin. But I also thought about my son, about the life I wanted him to grow up seeing, honesty, integrity, and respect. I realized I had to act carefully, strategically. This was not a moment for theatrics. It was a moment for truth. I started with my sister-in-law. I called her to meet at the park, somewhere public, somewhere neutral. I needed to see her face, to watch her reactions, to understand whether there was even a hint of remorse. She arrived with her usual polished demeanor, her hair perfectly styled, her smile as practiced as ever. But I could see it, the tension in her shoulders, the slight twitch of her fingers, the way her eyes flicked nervously around the park. She knew I had found out. "I want to talk," I said quietly, leading her to a bench under a tall oak tree. The leaves rustled softly in the wind, the sound masking the pounding of my heart. "I know what you've been doing with James. I know how long you've been helping him hide everything." Her eyes widened slightly, but she quickly regained composure. "I don't know what you mean," she said, her voice smooth but shaky. "You're imagining things." I shook my head, opening the folder on my lap and letting the document spill slightly onto the bench. "I'm not imagining anything. I have proof, receipts, notes, confirmations of your plans. You've been orchestrating this for years." She looked down, her lips pressed tightly together. "It wasn't like that," she whispered, almost too quietly for me to hear. But I could see it in her eyes, the lack of real remorse, the faint pride that she had been clever enough to keep her secret hidden. "You think this is clever," I said softly, "but it's betrayal. Betrayal of trust, of family, of me. And it ends now." I felt a wave of calm determination wash over me. For the first time in weeks, I felt in control. I wasn't screaming, I wasn't begging, I was simply stating the truth, and truth, I knew, could not be argued with. The next step was James. I couldn't allow him to continue the lie. I invited him to meet me after dinner, when the house was quiet, our son asleep, and I could speak without interruption. I didn't raise my voice, I didn't accuse, I simply laid the documents on the dining table, letting him see the evidence for himself. He looked at them, then at me, then back at the papers. I can explain," he stammered, but there were no words that could erase what had been done. Years of deception, carefully hidden, meticulously coordinated with someone who was supposed to be family. "I don't want explanations," I said firmly. "I want honesty, starting now." He faltered, realizing that his carefully constructed world was crumbling. The excuses he had rehearsed for years no longer held weight. And as he began to speak, stumbling over half-truths and admissions, I felt a strange mixture of sorrow and empowerment. I had uncovered the truth. I had confronted it. And now it was time to decide how the world would see it. I spent the next few days planning carefully. I wasn't acting out of vengeance. I wasn't trying to humiliate them. This was about accountability. I reached out to close family members, people who had unknowingly been part of the lie, and quietly explained the situation, showing them the proof I had gathered. The reactions were immediate: shock, disbelief, and in some cases, anger. But they also understood the importance of truth. And then came the moment I had been preparing for, telling my son. He was young, but not too young to understand that the adults in his life had been dishonest. I chose my words carefully, explaining that people sometimes make mistakes, sometimes hide things, but that honesty was always the path to trust and healing. His small hand in mine gave me strength. It reminded me of why I was doing this, not for revenge, not for pride, but to protect the integrity of the family we still had. By the end of the week, both James and my sister-in-law were facing the social consequences of their actions. Family gatherings became tense. Their once warm smiles were now replaced with polite, constrained nods. People who had trusted them began to question, to distance themselves. And while it wasn't a public spectacle, it never needed to be, there was a quiet, inevitable justice in knowing that deceit cannot endure indefinitely. It didn't take long for the truth to ripple beyond the walls of our home. The first wave came quietly. Subtle glances from relatives, hushed phone calls, people asking if everything was okay during casual gatherings. I noticed it in the way my mother-in-law avoided eye contact, in the stiff, almost formal nods of cousins who had once hugged me warmly. The knowledge that James and my sister-in-law had been hiding a life behind my back had spread, even if only in whispers. Family dinners became exercises in restraint. I remember sitting at the table one evening, the air thick with tension, my son quietly nibbling on his pasta, oblivious to the storm swirling around him. James tried, as he always had, to maintain a sense of normalcy, smiling politely, making small talk about work, but it felt hollow, rehearsed, like a play whose script he had memorized but could no longer perform convincingly. And my sister-in-law, she hovered near the kitchen doorway, pretending to check on the dishes, but her eyes betrayed her. Every glance she cast my way was a mixture of calculation and fear, as if she were weighing her next move. The real turning point came when my brother-in-law, her husband, finally learned the truth. He had been unaware of the long-running deception, trusting his wife as I had trusted both of them. When he confronted her, I was there, quietly observing from the next room. I didn't speak, I didn't intervene, but I listened. The confrontation was raw, filled with anger, disbelief, and hurt. She tried to explain, to soften the blow, but the weight of her actions was undeniable. Her lies, her collusion with James, and her years of deceit could not be undone with words. That evening I sat on the porch, the cool night air brushing against my skin, and I realized something profound. The betrayal was no longer just a private wound. It had become a public reckoning. People were beginning to see the truth. Friends, neighbors, even casual acquaintances had heard whispers, noticed odd behaviors, and pieced together the story. And while I had never intended to make this a spectacle, the consequences were inevitable. Lies, no matter how carefully constructed, eventually unravel. James faced his own reckoning as well. Colleagues who had once admired him began to distance themselves, small comments hinting at what had been discovered. He tried to explain, to spin his own narrative, but the evidence was too clear, too damning. Every receipt, every note, every documented meeting left him without a defense. It was a quiet justice, the kind that doesn't need to be loud to be effective. And yet, it wasn't about humiliation for me. I refused to indulge in cruelty. My goal was clarity, accountability, and protection for my son. I wanted him to understand that deception has consequences, that actions have repercussions, and that honesty is the only path to trust and respect. In some ways, it was as much a lesson for him as it was a consequence for them. I remember one particular day when my sister-in-law attempted to visit my home under the pretense of reconciliation. I met her at the door, my son playing quietly in the living room. Her smile was practiced, her voice warm, but I could see the tension in her shoulders. "I just wanted to talk," she said softly. I nodded, keeping my voice calm. "I understand," I replied, "but there's nothing more to say. The truth has already been revealed, and actions have consequences. We all live with the choices we make." Her eyes welled with tears, but I didn't move to comfort her. That wasn't my role. I had done my part, uncovered the truth, confronted it, and ensured that accountability was in place. What she did with that knowledge was now entirely her responsibility. Meanwhile, James tried desperately to salvage what little credibility he had left, but it was clear he had lost more than just my trust. His relationships with family members were strained, fractured beyond repair. Invitations ceased, calls went unanswered, and even his closest friends began to distance themselves. The quiet weight of social consequences was heavier than any verbal confrontation could ever be. And yet, the hardest part was not the public exposure, but the emotional fallout within our own home. My son, though young, could sense the tension. I could see it in his small gestures, the way he hesitated before asking questions, the cautious way he watched interactions, trying to measure the mood of the room. I made it a point to speak with him gently, reassuring him, reminding him that while adults make mistakes, our love for him remained steadfast, unshaken. One evening, after a particularly tense family gathering, I sat with him on the porch swing. The sky was a deep indigo, the stars beginning to prick the darkness with faint light. He rested his head against my shoulder, and I felt the weight of everything I had endured slowly begin to lift. "You'll be okay, Mama?" he asked quietly. I smiled, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. "Yes, sweetheart, we'll be okay. Things might feel messy right now, but honesty and truth always win in the end, and we have each other. That's what matters most." It was in these small moments that I realized the true power of consequence, not the humiliation of others, not the social shame, but the restoration of clarity and trust within my own family. I couldn't undo the betrayal, nor could I erase the years of lies, but I could protect the people that mattered, ensure that our home remained a place of safety and love. Over the following weeks, the tension in social interactions gradually shifted. Those who had been on the periphery of our lives came forward to offer quiet support, understanding, and solidarity. I noticed the subtle nods, the soft words of encouragement, and the small acts of kindness that reminded me that even amidst betrayal, there is compassion and understanding. And my sister-in-law? She withdrew into herself, her presence at family events minimal. It was a subtle, silent consequence, the kind that doesn't need to be shouted from rooftops. She faced the reality of what she had done, the isolation that comes from being complicit in deception, and the understanding that her actions had irrevocably altered relationships she had once taken for granted. And James attempted to reach out, offering apologies and explanations, but I maintained my boundaries, firm yet dignified. His path to redemption, if he chose to take it, would be separate from ours. I had learned that protecting my family, my son, and myself required clarity, decisiveness, and emotional strength. I refused to be drawn into repeated cycles of deceit, manipulation, or false reconciliation. By the end of this chapter of our lives, the truth had been exposed, accountability had been established, and the ripple effects of their actions had been felt throughout our family and community. The social consequences were neither cruel nor vengeful. They were simply the natural outcome of years of deception, revealed through courage, vigilance, and determination to protect what mattered most. The days after the family fallout felt strangely quiet, almost surreal. It was as if the house itself was holding its breath, waiting for the next act to unfold. But instead of chaos, there was clarity. I woke each morning feeling a weight lifted from my chest, a heavy fog dissipating to reveal a landscape I had almost forgotten existed, one of honesty, peace, and the possibility of a fresh start. I began to rebuild my routines, not as a woman shackled by suspicion, but as one guided by awareness. Mornings became calm again, preparing breakfast with my son, listening to him chatter about school and friends, and savoring the small, ordinary joys that I had once taken for granted. I noticed the smell of freshly baked bread on Saturdays, the warm sunlight filtering through the kitchen window, and the simple satisfaction of watching my son's eyes light up over scrambled eggs or toast. These moments, mundane to some, felt sacred to me. They were reminders that life continues even after betrayal, that healing is possible if one nurtures it carefully. I also spent time reflecting on the relationships that had been fractured. My family, though shaken, was beginning to repair itself in its own way. My son's father may have been absent in truth, but my role as a mother became even more intentional. I didn't try to shield him from the entire reality. He was perceptive, and shielding would have done him more harm than good. But I focused on the lessons that could be learned, the importance of honesty, boundaries, and self-respect. I taught him, gently, that mistakes happen. People sometimes fail us, but it's how we respond that defines our character. I remember one evening, sitting on the porch swing with him as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in deep shades of orange and purple. The air was cool, filled with the faint scent of jasmine from the garden. He rested his head on my shoulder, and I realized that in that small, quiet moment, there was no anger, no betrayal, only the simple, grounding truth of our bond. It was in these moments that I found a sense of peace I hadn't felt in years. Healing, I discovered, wasn't about revenge or punishment. It was about reclaiming my life, one choice at a time. I began to focus on the parts of myself that had been neglected during the years of deception, my hobbies, my friendships, and the quiet passions that brought me joy. I joined a local book club, started taking walks in the park without the constant anxiety of wondering what hidden truths might be waiting for me, and even began volunteering at the community center, helping children with reading and art. These small acts became my anchors, grounding me in the present and allowing me to rebuild a sense of self. James and my sister-in-law became shadows on the edges of my life. They were no longer central figures, no longer capable of disrupting the fragile peace I had worked so hard to establish. I didn't harbor hatred, though I won't pretend the betrayal didn't leave scars. I simply accepted that they had made choices that defined who they were, just as my own choices defined who I had become. There was dignity in moving forward, in reclaiming my life without being consumed by anger or revenge. I also found strength in setting boundaries. Family gatherings became easier to navigate because I no longer relied on appearances or pretenses. I could engage with fear, speak with honesty, and expect the same in return. I didn't avoid James or my sister-in-law out of fear. I engaged with clarity, maintaining distance while offering civility. It was liberating to know that I could control my own narrative rather than being a character in theirs. One afternoon, while cleaning out the old attic, I stumbled across a box of letters and photographs from the early years of my marriage. I held them in my hands, feeling the texture of the paper, the faint scent of ink and time. There were letters from him, written with hope and affection, and pictures of my son as a newborn, our small family laughing together. I felt a mixture of sorrow and gratitude, sorrow for the deception that had followed us, but gratitude for the moments of genuine love and joy that had existed alongside it. These memories became my compass, reminding me that even in the darkest chapters, there are moments worth holding on to. I began to reconnect with friends I had distanced myself from during the years of quiet tension. I shared my story with a few close confidants, not to dwell on the betrayal, but to gain perspective and wisdom. Their support was invaluable. They reminded me that I was not alone, that others had endured similar betrayals and emerged stronger, wiser, and more resilient. It was in these conversations that I realized something crucial. Healing is not linear. Some days are harder than others, but each step forward is a victory. Slowly, I noticed a change in my perspective. The anger and hurt that had once consumed me began to ebb, replaced by a quiet strength and a renewed sense of self-worth. I could look at my son and feel pride, not in shielding him from life's harsh truths, but in showing him how to navigate them with grace. I could look at the world and recognize that deceit and betrayal exist, but they do not define us unless we allow them to. One evening, as the house settled into silence and my son slept peacefully upstairs, I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea, watching the steam curl into the air. I thought about the journey I had endured, the suspicion, the discovery, the confrontation, and the public consequences. Each step had been painful, but each step had also taught me something invaluable about resilience, clarity, and the importance of protecting one's own peace. I realized that my life had changed irrevocably, but not entirely for the worse. The betrayal had forced me to see clearly, to set boundaries, and to reclaim my own narrative. It had shown me that strength comes not from holding power over others, but from holding power over oneself, from making deliberate choices, standing firm in truth, and refusing to allow deceit to dictate the course of our lives. And in that quiet moment, sipping tea and feeling the warmth seep into my hands, I knew that I was ready to embrace the future, to continue building a home filled with honesty and love, and to face each day with calm resolve. The scars remained, yes, but they were no longer chains. They were reminders of the lessons I had learned, the strength I had discovered, and the clarity I had gained. Time, I learned, doesn't erase pain, but it reshapes it. The sharp edges of betrayal softened into something I could carry without breaking. I found myself noticing the little things again, the morning light streaming through the living room, the smell of my son's hair after he showered, the rhythm of our quiet evenings together. Life had returned to a slower pace, a gentler rhythm, one that I had almost forgotten existed amidst the chaos of lies. I began to reflect on the past with a clarity I hadn't had before. Every smile I had shared with James, every laugh with my sister-in-law, even the seemingly ordinary family dinners now carried layers of understanding. I recognized the illusions for what they were, carefully constructed facades meant to protect their secrets. And though it pained me to admit it, I also recognized how much I had grown because of it. I realized the betrayal had forced me to confront not just their deception, but my own blind spots. I had trusted too easily, assumed loyalty where it wasn't guaranteed, and ignored subtle signs that should have raised alarms. That reflection was uncomfortable but necessary. It reminded me that trust is a precious gift, but one that must be earned and maintained. And more importantly, it reminded me that the true measure of character is revealed in how we respond to hurt, whether we allow it to consume us or whether we rise above it. I began to set intentional boundaries with both James and my sister-in-law. Their presence in my life, though reduced, was no longer a source of uncertainty. Interactions were civil but measured. There was no longer any need for deception, no room for manipulation. I felt lighter, unburdened by the tension that had dominated so much of my life. And I noticed something remarkable. The more I maintained my integrity, the more respect I earned, not from them, but from myself. My son became my anchor, my reason for holding on to calm and perspective. I shared with him, gently, the lessons I wanted him to carry into his own life. Honesty matters, actions have consequences, and while people sometimes disappoint us, we can choose how we respond. One afternoon, as we planted flowers in the garden, he looked up at me with his small, earnest eyes and said, "Mama, I'm glad you told me the truth." That moment, so simple yet profound, reminded me that transparency and love could coexist even after deceit. I also began to reconnect with the world outside my home. Friends I had distanced myself from returned with warmth and understanding. Conversations flowed freely again, laughter returned, and the weight of secrecy that had hung over me for so long finally began to lift. I felt a renewed sense of purpose, a quiet confidence that I could navigate whatever challenges life presented with clarity and dignity. And yet, I never forgot the lessons learned from betrayal. I stayed vigilant, but without paranoia. I cultivated trust carefully, observing consistency over time, appreciating honesty as a rare and valuable gift. Every relationship I nurtured afterward was approached with intention, a quiet balance of openness and discernment. One particularly reflective evening, I sat alone on the porch swing, the sky painted in soft purples and pinks, and thought about the people who had caused me pain. I didn't feel anger anymore. It had transformed into something quieter, steadier, understanding. Understanding that people sometimes make choices that hurt others, not always maliciously, but because of their own flaws, fears, or selfish desires. Recognizing that allowed me to release the last traces of bitterness, not for their sake, but for mine. I wrote in my journal, capturing the journey I had endured, the initial suspicion, the devastating discovery, the confrontations, the public reckoning, and finally the slow, deliberate path toward healing. Reading the words back, I could see how far I had come. There was sadness, yes, but also strength, resilience, and an enduring sense of self-respect. It was in this quiet reflection that I realized something fundamental. Life continues after betrayal, but it continues differently. The pain never fully disappears, but it can be transformed into wisdom, into lessons that guide us toward better choices, healthier relationships, and a deeper understanding of ourselves. I no longer feared deception because I had seen it clearly, faced it fully, and emerged stronger on the other side. And I wanted others to understand this too. I wanted to share that even when family members, the people we trust most, betray us, we can reclaim our lives. We can protect our children, preserve our dignity, and nurture our hearts. We can choose honesty, clarity, and love over resentment and revenge. I thought about the women I had met online, in forums and community groups, sharing stories similar to mine, silent betrayals, in-law manipulations, husbands hiding lives in plain sight. I wanted to reach out to them through this story to tell them, you are not alone, you can rise, you can reclaim your life, and you can emerge stronger than you ever imagined. Sitting there in the calm of the evening, I asked myself a question. Would I have found the courage to act if I hadn't loved myself enough to demand the truth? And I knew the answer, yes. I had found strength I didn't realize I possessed, and it had guided me through the darkest chapter of my life. I thought, too, about forgiveness, not for them, not yet, perhaps, not entirely, but for myself. Forgiveness for the times I doubted my own instincts, for the moments I had ignored the subtle warnings, for the weeks I had carried anxiety and mistrust in silence. Forgiving myself allowed me to finally breathe freely, to let go of the past without erasing it, and to step forward with clarity and intention. As the night deepened, I felt a gentle sense of closure. The chapters of betrayal, secrecy, and deception had ended. What remained was life, raw, honest, and filled with potential. I could move forward without fear, without the burden of lies, guided by the lessons I had learned and the love I had nurtured within my home. And so I write this not as a tale of bitterness or revenge, but as a testament to resilience, to the quiet strength it takes to confront betrayal, to protect the ones we love, and to reclaim our lives with dignity. Life is messy, people make mistakes, and trust can be broken, but it can also be rebuilt, carefully, intentionally, and with love. I leave you with this question. If you discovered a betrayal within your closest family, would you have the courage to confront it, to protect yourself and those you love while maintaining your dignity? The choice is ours always, and sometimes the hardest choices lead to the most profound growth. The house is quieter now. The tense whispers, the subtle glances, the hidden messages, all of it has faded into memory. At first, that quiet felt almost too heavy, like a room left empty for too long. But over time, it became a space of peace. I sit in the living room most evenings, the soft hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of the floorboards the only sounds accompanying me, and I feel a calm I didn't think I could find again. I watch my son as he plays, his laughter filling the corners of the home that had once been clouded with uncertainty. He has no reason to remember the lies, the betrayals, or the moments when trust felt fragile and fleeting. For him, the home is a place of love, warmth, and stability, and that is exactly what I intend to preserve. Every choice I make, every boundary I set, is guided by the responsibility I feel toward him. I want him to understand that integrity matters, that honesty is a gift, and that even when people fail us, life continues, sometimes stronger than before. I think about James and my sister-in-law, and I realize I no longer carry anger the way I once did. Anger is a heavy, consuming thing, and I have learned it can be replaced by something quieter but infinitely stronger: clarity. I see them now for what they truly are: flawed, human, capable of choices that hurt others deeply, but their actions no longer hold power over me. I do not dwell on the past because dwelling only prolongs pain. Instead, I focus on what I can build, on what I can nurture, and on the peace I can create for the life that remains mine. In these quiet moments, I reflect on all the lessons betrayal has taught me. I've learned that intuition matters. Those small, uneasy feelings that something isn't quite right are worth listening to. I've learned that confrontation, though painful, is necessary for clarity and growth. And most importantly, I've learned that true strength lies not in controlling others, but in controlling ourselves, our choices, our responses, and our boundaries. There are mornings when I still catch myself replaying old conversations, wondering how I missed certain signs. But those moments no longer bring despair, they bring insight. They remind me that I am human, that I made mistakes, but also that I survived them, and in surviving, I became stronger. I can look at my son and see the future I am shaping for him, a future rooted in honesty, resilience, and love. I have reconnected with friends I had neglected, neighbors who had once been peripheral to my life, and even distant relatives. Sharing my story with them, not as a way to expose others, but as a way to process and understand, has been healing. I discovered that by speaking my truth, I empowered others to speak theirs. We formed a quiet network of support, a reminder that even when family fails, community and chosen bonds can restore faith in human connection. One evening, I took a long walk through the park near our home. The cool breeze carried the scent of autumn leaves, and I watched the sunlight glint off the river like scattered diamonds. Children played in the distance, couples strolled hand in hand, and for the first time in months, I felt a sense of belonging to the world around me. Life, with all its messiness, continued, and I was part of it again, fully present, fully alive, no longer shadowed by deceit. I think often about forgiveness, not for James or my sister-in-law, not entirely, at least not yet, but for myself, forgiving myself for trusting too easily, for the moments I ignored subtle warnings, for the nights spent agonizing over uncertainty. Forgiveness freed me. It allowed me to breathe deeply again, to live without the constant undercurrent of tension, and to approach life with hope rather than suspicion. Forgiveness, I realized, is not about absolving those who hurt us, it's about reclaiming our own peace and power. And I also think about justice, not revenge, not humiliation, not public shaming, but quiet accountability. Both James and my sister-in-law face the consequences of their actions. They experience the loss of trust, the strain in relationships, and the inevitable social distancing that comes when deception is revealed. Watching that unfold was not satisfying in a cruel way, but it reinforced a truth I hold dear. Lies and deceit always leave traces, and actions carry consequences, whether immediately visible or gradually revealed over time. The most profound change, though, has been in myself. I am calmer, stronger, more observant. I have learned to value my own intuition, to honor my feelings, and to protect the people I love without allowing betrayal to define my world. I have discovered that resilience is not a single act, but a series of choices: to rise after disappointment, to speak after being silenced, to act with dignity when others fail to do so. And now, as I share my story with you, I feel a sense of purpose. I know there are women, men, and families out there who have faced similar betrayals, who have felt the sting of hidden secrets, and who may be wondering if recovery is possible. It is. Life continues, and it continues differently after betrayal. Perhaps quieter, perhaps more intentional, but it continues with opportunity for growth, clarity, and even joy. So I ask you, the one listening now, if someone you trusted most deceived you, if betrayal entered your home and your heart, would you find the courage to face the truth, to protect yourself and those you love, to set boundaries and reclaim your life? These are difficult questions, but they are the ones that shape our character and our future. I also ask you to reflect on this. What does honesty mean in your life? How do you choose to honor your own integrity and the trust of others? Betrayal, while painful, can be a catalyst, a reminder of the strength we sometimes forget we possess and the clarity we can bring to our lives when we face reality with courage. And finally, I want to extend a quiet invitation. If my story resonates with you, if it has reminded you of your own journey, or if you simply wish to hear more real-life stories of family, secrets, betrayal, and healing, please subscribe. Join me, and let's share in the lessons that life teaches us about love, honesty, resilience, and hope. Because even after heartbreak, life continues, and with courage, clarity, and a heart willing to heal, there is always a way forward.